Yo, 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 yo. What is going on, COD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder. And today, we are, I guess I should say COD probably and are okay, Familia. But today, we're actually going to be reacting and taking a look at Chisgule's one of his recent videos titled Rise of Kingdoms vs. Call of Dragons, which should you play in 2024? We're probably not going to listen to it the entire way through, so I'm probably going to skip to basically the start or beginning of each of the topics and arguments for both. And I thought this would be interesting to react to and kind of see, what are some of the main areas that Chiz finds of interest. How is he going about rating each of those areas, and then what's the conclusion at the end, and then just kind of give you my thoughts. In case you're wondering what's going on with my face, don't worry, my daughter just bedazzled it, which is pretty standard these days. As always, if you enjoy the content, make sure you because it helps us out a lot. Here we go.
Back, I'm Chisgule Gaming, and for those of you that are subscribed to the channel, you know that I spend a ridiculous amount of money in mobile games. I've spent over the scale I'm going to use. We are going to evaluate the following categories. First and foremost, is it free-to-play friendly or is it totally pay-to-win? We'll talk about friendly. Is it too pay-to-win or is it free-to-play friendly? Let's start off with Rise of Kingdoms. And the thing that, in my eyes, really holds back Rise of Kingdoms is that, it definitely has a lot of things you can spend on. I mean, you can spend on speed-ups to train troops and resources and all these things. But the thing that is going to drive the rating here for Rise of Kingdoms in the pay-to-win, free-to-play dimension is ultimately the way that the end game works. You enter into these, what they call them Season of Conquest stories, which is basically a battle against other large groups, kingdoms. And they are very fun. But you must spend on crystal technology to be relevant. You can technically, over time, work on your crystal technology free to play, but you basically get through the first 3 seasons of the game, and unless you've actually been doing your research to know that the end game you have to pay to continue to have that level of relevance, over time.
I just want to see what this thing says. However, each season your crystal technology resets, and you have to start over heavy pay-to-win plan to spend $1K per season. Okay.
Work on your crystal technology free to play, but overall, I would say on a scale of 1 to 10 that this game gets a 3. It is just got a lot of pay to win. And the funny thing is you can pay a lot of money and still not win. I have done my fair share of losing. You can pay to win at an individual account level and still get clapped at a kingdom level. And that's actually a very good thing. That actually is a very, very good thing, in my opinion, for the overall state of the game. But the overall rating is a 3, driven largely by the necessity of spending on crystal technology for relevance, and also a core endgame loop is rallying and garrisoning. Because of the way that crystal technology works, there's no way to participate in rallies and garrisons as a leader. Not really, because you'll never have the crystal technology. All right. From here, we can switch gears and talk about Call of Dragons. And I would say that Call of Dragons is more free-to-play friendly. But there is definitely a lot you can still spend on. There's a couple things that are super free-to-play friendly. One is that healing is free. So in Rise of Kingdoms, you will spend many billions of resources on healing. You also will do that in Call of Dragons, potentially, but you have daily free healing, and it is pretty freaking outstanding. The daily free healing is a 10 out of 10 feature to exist in this game. It is very cool. Now, with that said, there are a bunch of things that you can buy, and that includes artifacts that you put onto your heroes. These artifacts are super powerful, and there's not really a way to get them into a meaningful state without spending for at least the best artifacts. But there is free-to-play ways to go in and work on a bunch of artifacts that are still pretty damn good. We'll talk more about artifacts and pets later on.
Okay, so the only thing I would have liked to see here is it seems like the arguments are kind of differently focused. To me, if you're going to assess if something is free to play, is more free to play than another game, or more pay to win than another game, you would want to go through each area that you can spend in and then draw similarities. Where are the common denominators? So as an example, in the main focus for Rock, Chiz was talking about crystal technology, how that is a very spender-focused area that happens each season, as we saw the disclaimer text at the bottom. But then we go over to COD, And one of the points he spends a little bit more time on is talking about artifacts, right? Clearly, artifacts would probably be more closely related to equipment within Rock. But my point is it would have been nice to see that, right? So if you're going to say, right, here's the amount of heroes you could spend on that are pay to win. Here's the amount of in COD versus Rock. Here's the amount of artifacts versus equipment that you can buy, right? Like basically comparing spending at each level, I think would have been a better way to approach it in the breakdown, just because it feels very compartmentalized and isolated, where it's like, oh, we'll focus on one area of spending in this game and then another area of spending in a different game, and you're not really drawing any similar comparisons, right? Or we could argue relevant comparisons for the viewer. Okay, let's go.
Overall, I would say that this game actually gets an 8 out of 10 for free-to-play friendliness. Rallying and garrisoning is not a major part of this game, unlike Rise of Kingdoms. Rallying and garrisoning is where people are gathering their troops together to participate in an attack against a structure. The overwhelming majority of the fighting that you do in this game is purely in the field. And so, although I happen to be garrisoning something now, very, very little of the fighting is done here in this game, which means you can be fully effective in the open field, which is a thing that if you're free to play, you're never, ever really able to do in Rise of Kingdoms. Something I really want to establish.
Okay, so I just want to comment there at the end of that because let me just off the ratings. So for my time playing Rock, and bear in mind, I haven't played it for about the last 2 years, but for the first 3 years-ish that I played, I somewhat agree on the assessment that I think a 3 to like a 4 is probably an okay rating, or I should say a good rating assessment. And then when we look at COD, I think the rating's a little high. I probably would give it like a 6 or 7, right? Maybe like, I would say maybe, and I say that because, yes, do I think that the game overall is more free-to-play friendly than Rock? But let me provide some additional reasoning. So one, right, the game itself has true ranged. And the reason why having true ranged is more of a free-to-play friendly mechanic than it is a spending, or I should just say in general, is because of the fact that as a free-to-play player, you do not have to put yourself in direct harm's way by basically fighting face-to-face, right? Like how an infantry or a cavalry unit would, right? Which means that you have a little bit more escapability, right? And because of that, you have flexibility. So when you play a ranged unit, right, like Mage, because again, with Mage, it's very far range. With Archers, it's far. So it's like Mage is here very far, Archers is far, and then you also have some Celestials, right, which is far, and then you have some ranged Cav, which is like close or short range. So as a free-to-play, you have the opportunity to fight at max range distance, and you also have the ability to engage, disengage, right? You don't necessarily have to hard commit, right? Because in Rock, all of the units basically act like infantry. Everyone just attacks at the face, even if you have a ranged unit. So that's one of the things. Number two is you have Celestials. These are flying units. So these are units that can go over mountains and over areas that no other unit can, which means that if you're free to play, you now even arguably have more flexibility and escapability, especially if you're fighting in any of these types of areas, because then you can really more so micro and control the engagements that you decide to go in on. So in my opinion, I actually think Celestials are the most free-to-play friendly unit simply because of that they can fly over terrain that the other 4 units cannot, and they can go over rivers, they can go over mountain ranges, they can go up ledges and down ledges on terrain that ramps connect to. And so when you look at it like that, it makes a little bit more sense there. On the part where he's talking about open field versus rally gameplay, well, the thing about open field is that you have a lot more control. There's a lot more interaction and engagement that as an individual player you have available to you in the game, versus joining a rally where if someone's doing the rally, which is right, usually the people who are doing the rally are the ones that usually have the best stats and are in the best position to do so, and this typically comes down on average to spenders, mid-high. And so as a free-to-play player, you're not really doing anything. You just join the rally. It's like hopping on a train and the train's already going in its direction, right? So in Call of Dragons, you have more flexibility to participate and engage in fights. I personally think that's more free-to-play friendly. So anyways, just wanted to add on a few other things there that I think are also relevant outside of the free resource hilling that Chiz had mentioned.
at the front of this video is that I feel Rise of Kingdoms and Call of Dragons are, in my opinion, some of the best city building war games in the market right now. And that is because of their open field movement. It allows for a level of gameplay that always exceeds the sort of point and click nature of some of the fighting in other games where like you literally target the thing, your march goes to the thing, you see a slashy sword, and then you get a report aspects of the game. And I think there's two things that make Community so successful. First of all, you are in danger at all times. Your city can be attacked. This is true of Call of Dragons and in Rise of Kingdoms. In Rise of Kingdoms, it's built around the core unit of a kingdom, which is a community. The core unit of play in this game is designed around community, and that freaking slaps. You can migrate to other kingdoms for the most part and play with the people you want to play with. There are limitations against the biggest kingdoms, and those kingdoms are very much being strangled based on this Imperium designation, forcing them to be at a power level that's not so far above everyone that like there's no way for them to even play the game against a group that can be competitive against them. So overall, I would actually give Rise of Kingdoms a 9 out of 10. As far as community goes in this style of game, it, I think, is one of the best. And it's one of the best, not by a little, but by a lot. And this has a shocking and stark comparison to Call of Dragons, which, thank goodness, there are some big changes on the way. But I actually would give Call of Dragons a 1 out of 10, which is the lowest score possible. And like, why is that? This is a season-based game, and you have no proper home kingdom. Technically, you are attached to a server, but it doesn't matter. You basically play this game in seasons. You get thrown onto a map, your kingdom does, but you can start in whatever zone you want. Because of that, basically communities are created throughout a season and then destroyed with each season. And you can't even really migrate into the other people's kingdoms that you played with in a reliable way to go play with them. So if I get a look over here, this is the migration, which is in progress right now. You can only migrate during this window of time. You cannot migrate globally at the time of this recording, but that is changing. And you can't even really know whether or not the server you want to join is full. There's these color lights, but it's like very unclear how much space there is or isn't. Whereas in Rise of Kingdoms, people are able to mathematically calculate exactly how much space there is using a number of tools and methods that we don't need to get into now. So players can very much manage their communities in Rise of Kingdoms. And like, I'll tell you, like, we just migrated in Call of Dragons, which is a thing you do very regularly in this game, in order to like basically ditch your dead weight and try to find a server where there's more room so that hopefully you can get more active players to come with you. And like, it's so stressful because like, we just don't even know if we're going to be able to migrate our group over. And we had a ton of people that we also wanted to join our group that aren't able to right now because we just don't know if we would have enough space. And it's too risky to like halfway move into a migration and then get wrecked because they can't come over. So like, this is all changing in Call of Dragons over the next half year, which will dramatically improve the game. And overall, I think has the potential to match Rise of Kingdoms in terms of community building. So I expect that by the end of this year, this will be closer to a 9 rating. But right now, it's an honest 1. And I love this game. And this is the one thing, in my opinion, that has dramatically hindered this game's ability to be the thing that I think it could be. Truly, it's this. This is probably the harshest dimension by which I will rank Call of Dragons because, like, I mean, how crazy is it that in order for a group that's been playing together since the beginning of the game to stay together, we kind of have to roll the dice if we want to get new people in and move to another place. Like, and we have to move every season. It's just, anyways, all that to say, this should be better in the future. Of course, one of the...
Okay, so 2 things here. First off, dang on those ratings, like just really harsh. So this is what I'll say about Rock, right? When you're talking about community, let's first define community. So community is your ability to build a social, engaging network with the player base that you have available to you. It's a very simplified way of putting it, right? And one of the benefits that Rise of Kingdoms has in this regard is that they have home kingdoms, right? So you're not escaping a home kingdom or not being able to ever go back to your home kingdom or see the people that are there or see the alliances that are there or the players that are there, the players that are allianceless, and maybe you're trying to help and get them into active alliances so you can increase your overall activity within the kingdom, right? You are really trying to nurture a player base. And typically a player base in all regards is, again, remember, it's called Rise of Kingdoms, not Rise of Alliances, right? Or it's called Call of Dragons, not Call of Dragon, right? And so the idea here is that you should hopefully, in my opinion, be trying to build kingdoms that are more than just one alliance worth of activity and players. And so because of that, Rise of Kingdoms gives you that opportunity to do so, where you can have more than 2, more than 3, more than 4, more than 5, more than 6 healthy active alliances, right? Arguably as many as you quote unquote could, right? As long as you're able to manage them appropriately. And so, again, I don't want to get into the whole like, oh yeah, even though that's on average not necessarily being done, right? I can do a whole deep data dive on that later. But then you look at the mechanics, you look at the community tools that are available to you, right? Other things that Chiz just did not mention in his part there, which is, for example, you have king and queen tools, right? These are incremental if that's the right word to use. I'll just say they are valuable in being able to nurture and grow community. For example, you being able to send a king's mail out to every single player in the kingdom, that is a way to help organize and coordinate your player base. You can inform them, your community, of what's happening, of upcoming events, of what we're going to be doing preparation-wise for KVK, if we're going to have fun events internally, if we're going to do, voice calls or a town hall for everyone in the kingdom on the Discord. I mean, again, it just allows for you to engage because you have the ability to reach everyone in the kingdom. Doing things, for example, like hitting buffs, things that affect everyone in the kingdom, right? Things that players enjoy. Titles, being able to progress their accounts faster because they can reduce things like the amount of building time and the amount of research time on particular upgrades, especially if you're able to do that for everyone, right? This is just another example of something that affects multiple players within your community and up to however many people end up engaging on that front. And then we look at Call of Dragons, right? And let me just say this. I would not rate Rock a 9. I would rate, mainly because I think Rock actually has a lot more opportunity to grow. I would probably rate Rock like a 7, right? Maybe a 6, but probably more of a hard 7. And then for something like COD, I would probably rate it like a 2. I don't think it's the absolute worst, right? But I don't think that it's... they just don't really have anything that allows for you to really build a kingdom in that regard. It doesn't mean that you cannot organize. It doesn't mean that you cannot do things. You just have to do it in a workaround way, right? So it's not as though, if we're just purely talking about, right, the tools and the features that are available to you to build a community, then I can understand why Chiz would say a 1. I would probably just say a 2 because there are some ways that you can do that, even albeit you have to do them externally. But there are also things that you do externally as well in Rock that are not internally within the game that help you organize a community. But yeah, the fact is I think Chiz is absolutely right on both fronts. Here in COD, once again, the challenge is that you can't see anyone in your home kingdom because you have no way to go back to your home kingdom. You basically are in forced KVKs back to back to back after Season 1, which is your home kingdom. So once you get to Season 2, you're just resetting and starting a new season in a new KVK with potentially new matchups, new kingdoms, and new alliances that you're seeing, but you're never able to go back to your home kingdom, to the actual map visually, and see the alliances, the players, who's in what zones, who has what territory. You can't even see home kingdom leaderboards to know who's actually a part of your group. You have no way of knowing who's come into your kingdom, who's left. But to be fair, I don't think there's a way to do that in Rock either. Obviously a great feature. Hopefully they add it just as much as I'm hoping they eventually add that to COD. So yeah, in all, I do think these are fair assessments. I think these are fair ratings from Chiz, and just wanted to add a little more context.
First things you'll do in a city building war game is build up your city. So let's talk about city progression. Buildings, research, and the whole 9 yards as you build up. And I would give Rise of Kingdoms an 8 out of 10. That's an absolutely fabulous score. There's only a couple things that are kind of a knock against it. One is that to take any building to 25, and this is true of both Call of Dragons and Rise of Kingdoms, you have to buy these master blueprints, which cost 2,000 gems a pop. It's just expensive. It's gating. I don't know why we need this gating. At least in Rise of Kingdoms, there's an event called More Than Gems, where you can spend gems during the event and get a bunch of things you really value for having spent your gems, which is really cool. The other thing that you end up buying in the shop in this game, depending on how much you're rushing, is, oh my gosh, can I even click where I want to go? Is these two things right over here. Arrows of Resistance and Books of the Covenant. You're going to buy a lot of these, spend a lot of gems. At least you can do this during More Than Gems and get a bunch of other things you value, like working on commanders, you get resources, you get speed ups, and a bunch of other cool stuff. So there are ways to do this in an economy-based way, but there are buildings that are just going to be gated on their progress based on your ability to be generating large amounts of these. And like genuinely, although you can do Arrows of Resistance fully free to play, really the Books of the Covenant, you have to gem them if you want to ever finish the buildings you need. And you do need those to get to tier 5. Now, the other thing that's really cool about city development in this game is there's actually a lot of ways to enhance the speed with which you get stuff done. So you have Alliance technology, which is going to help you with your research speed and your building speed, which is very cool. You also have holy sites. You've got kingdom-based buffs. You've got kingdom-based titles. There are a ton of things designed to help you get to the end game faster in Rise of Kingdoms and to aid you in your progression of your city. So I give that an 8 overall. Contrast that to Call of Dragons. And I would say Call of Dragons is similar, but I would actually give it a 6, a lower score. And there's a couple reasons for the lower score. The main reason, however, is that progression here is going to come slower. It's going to come slower because there's no Alliance technology to aid you for research speed and building speed. Every season, there's a reset. So although there are the equivalent of holy sites that you have in Rise of Kingdoms that you go and capture, here you have behemoths, but you start the season without them. So in Rise of Kingdoms, you basically get research speed, building speed buffs, and all these things. Here, every season, you've got to go capture the behemoths, and you may not even get them, right? Like in an endgame kingdom, you're guaranteed to have them in Rise of Kingdoms. Here, like maybe you'll get them this season, maybe you won't. Like hard to say. Also, there's no More Than Gems event here. So you need to spend the gems just the same as you do in Rise of Kingdoms, but there's no payback for having done it. I love that you can zoom all the way in and all the way out on your city.
Okay. First off, the very last thing he said there, absolutely on point. I love how you can zoom all the way in and out of your city like that too. I think this is spot on with this one. The fact is that if you're just comparing the opportunities to progress and the rate of progression in general for what is available to you in each game, Rock obviously has more than what CoD does. I think a lot of people have been asking for a More Than Gems event, and I think the last thing they said is that no at the moment, but it's something that they'll look into. In addition, with the resets, right, I think the difference really, if you're just summarizing these two, it's that Rock is constant, where you have constant buffs, right? So even if you go into a KVK, you still have the constant buffs that you're getting from the alliances as it pertains to city progression, and of course in other areas as well. Whereas in CoD, because they reset, you lose any potential buffs on the behemoths, meaning they're not constant, right? You have to regain them, along with the areas that we don't have in CoD. So I actually think this is fair. I would even argue that I would probably lower it from like a 6 to probably a 3 or a 4 for CoD when it comes to, if we're just specifically talking about opportunities for boosted progression that the game offers you, right? I would lower it probably more of like a hard 3, right? And then if you're looking at Rock and saying Rock is an 8, I think an 8 is fair.
That's actually freaking dope about both games, but let's talk about commanders versus heroes. In these games, you fight with either commanders in Rise of Kingdoms or heroes in Call of Dragons. Now, the way they work is very similar in both games. You're going to level them up. You're going to star them up. Starring them up is going to unlock more skills. And overall, the design of heroes, which are a crucial collectible in these games, is really cool. The graphics here are pretty good. Overall, in Rise of Kingdoms, I would give this a 6. There's a huge diversity of commanders, but there are some things that are kind of a dud. Like some of the talent trees in this game don't make any sense. The versatility tree is actually just dead weight. Integration is just dead weight. Leadership was once a thing in the open field, but has been discontinued for open field and now is only for cities. So like, there's been some weirdness with sort of the way that commanders work, and I think there's certainly room to improve. I'll say for sure that like it's a bit of a bummer that you can't pick where your skills go. So in this game and in Call of Dragons, you have no control. You have some control over where your skills go, but you can't actually pick. So for example, if I want to determine where my skills go in Rise of Kingdoms on a new commander, I can use a thing called skill lock to sort of control where heroes look cool. Talent trees are generally pretty good. Overall, pretty sweet. Call of Dragons also gets a 6, but for some different reasons. And there are things that are certainly different. So we pull up Call of Dragons, and the talent trees in this game, I would say, are generally pretty sweet. There is no equivalent of that versatility tree, which is just totally worthless in all situations, quite frankly, even for versatile situations. The heroes in this game, I would say, at this stage kind of suffers from a lack of diversity. The game is still young, so there just aren't a ton of heroes to mix and match, whereas in Rise of Kingdoms, there's really beautiful mixing and matching and you know, old heroes getting revived by the launch of new heroes. In this game, I would say my biggest criticism of the heroes is that they're too cookie cutter. Like, when they release new heroes, you're just supposed to put them together. Don't think, just pair the new heroes. So like, Sindrian came out with Frhagar, and they have immense synergy and are meant to be paired together. Bertrand and Tohar came out together, and they have immense synergy. They're very much meant to be paired together. Goresh and Skogul came out together. They're meant to be together. All that to say, I think there's pros and cons to both systems. In Rise of Kingdoms, you have more mix and match, which is really sweet. Here, you do not. In terms of skills, you have even less control over where they go because there's no skill lock. Overall, I would still give this a 6, though. Like, for both Rise of Kingdoms and Call of Dragons, 6 out of 10, which is a pretty solid score because I'm being extra harsh to differentiate in this video. From here, though, we can actually start to talk.
Okay, so on the heroes aspect, at least it was a 6 rating for both. I mean, I would say it's hard to say that is bad or is good. I would say that's okay on average. So I think when you look at Rock, right, the idea. Let me define this universally first. So as heroes, commanders, champions, whatever you may call them, right, depending on what your kingdom builder is, the idea of a hero is that every hero should have a purpose, meaning. That it doesn't mean that every hero can be used in the exact same way, but every hero should have value, right? There should be a reason behind why you would use any given hero in a particular situation, right? And with also the understanding that eventually, maybe after a period of time or after there's enough heroes out, right, you can eventually get to a point where maybe you're seeing lower usage rates out of other heroes, but to me, it's almost like, you know, kind of look at it like League of Legends, right? You have a lot of heroes in League of Legends, and of course, I don't know the rates on if heroes in League of Legends, if there's any that just absolutely are never played. But I would imagine that if there are any heroes that have incredibly low usage percentages or rates, that those heroes are looked at by the devs, and it's, hey, how can we fix this? How can we tinker this to try to increase its usage rate, right? And so I kind of view heroes in kingdom builders in a very similar way, which is that regardless if it's a mix and match, and bear in mind, it is somewhat easier to say that because, like Chiz also pointed out, there's just so many more heroes in Rise of Kingdoms than there is in Call of Dragons. One of the things I very much like in Call of Dragons, and I think this is more of a differentiating point when we compare both games, is that there is more role-type focuses in Call of Dragons than Rise of Kingdoms as it pertains to the PvP mechanics and tiers of troops and how they can be utilized in the field. And I'll give you an example. So with flying units, you can eventually have a full squad of flying units, right? You can have a player who runs nothing but flying. And of course, in Rock, you can have players that just run nothing but one type as well. But the difference is that all the units hit each other, right? They're all, like we talked about before, they're all basically infantry units in how they interact. They all have to be face-to-face when they're hitting, regardless if they're labeled as a range unit or not. In CoD, you have this opportunity to where you can run 5 archers, 5 mages, 5 celestials at ranged and have that be more of a role type focused. Now, for example, as it pertains again to the heroes on, can we mix and match, or are we going to release as pairs? To be honest, it doesn't really matter to me on what they do. I personally like this idea of them not releasing heroes specifically as pairs. Because I think that it's a little too dummy proof, so to speak, right? I think it's like a handicap is probably a better way to say that. In the sense that I think customization should be something that we see trial and error from on the community, right? Where there's this opportunity to see what mix and matches, what pairs will be the best through mix and matching, through trial and error testing, and through research, right? That's something I think is a cut above just releasing heroes and you already know they work together, right? It kind of like takes any of the fun of figuring these things out for yourself. Don't do that. And so, anyways, those are just my general thoughts. But I think the rating overall is actually okay. I think when it comes to talent trees, the same thing I was saying before. I think it's good to have useful talent trees. This is one of the reasons why, and I'll give you a great example. In CoD, they have an engineering talent tree. And the engineering talent tree is meant to be a benefit for building and destroying structures and having other benefits here and there. But one of the things that a lot of players have been asking for, which kind of hones in on what I'm talking about as kind of more player roles outside of just necessarily maybe hero roles types, is that we've been asking, don't do that, we've been asking for them to allow for EXP gains from players, for heroes that have the engineering talent tree where they can gain EXP from going out and building structures. And maybe even destroying structures, right? Depending on how they work it in. And this is something that they're going to eventually be adding in because the community's been calling for it. So now this makes it so you have particular heroes that have engineering preferences that now can be used in either one way a lot or in multiple ways, especially if they're a PvP hero that just happens to have engineering. Good example of this is Nico, who's an archer DPS hero. Nico is still used in the open field today, but is not necessarily used maybe as much as he could be, right? Once the EXP gains come out from heroes. Now, maybe you still may prioritize this hero as more PvP focused and kind of engineering support secondary, but the point stands is that you're able to now have more flexibility in the hero usage because you're allowing for them to be used in different ways that are not solely PvP related.
Talk about the ways that you enhance your heroes. And the first thing we need to talk about is in Rise of Kingdoms, and that is the equipment system. And the equipment system is basically stat sticks that you throw onto your commanders, and they can be moved between commanders. There's a lot of them you need. You need 8 different pieces of equipment per march that you bring in the field. You will bring in upwards of 7 marches to the field if you are spending in the game. If you're not spending, then 5 is probably the max you will bring out at a time. And that means you need a lot of equipment. Each of these sets of equipment represents $10,000 or more worth of money that I've spent in the game. No cap. Like straight up, like $10,000 a pop per set here. And that's because I have gone for legendary equipment, which is the highest rarity currently available. I have what's called a special talent, which gives you bonus stats on top of that. And then much of this equipment I am now bringing to the iconic tier, so you can tier it up 5 times and get extra stuff. This is like tier 5 iconic with a special talent, okay? There are several criticisms I would have of the way the equipment system works, although I do really like, for example, that you can work on the materials you need for crafting in an incremental nature, and crafting is the way that you are getting this equipment. By the way, you can't find it. There's no randomness on the stats of the equipment you get, which I think is fine in this game, but there is randomness as to whether or not you get a special talent. And if you don't get a special talent, you can go through a process of refining it, which pretty heart-wrenching at times. Some people like this kind of randomness. Me personally, I do not. All right, I'll just simply say it like that. All right, I much prefer what's going on with the iconic tiering system, where I mentioned you can take things up to tier 5. This for me is more fun and more satisfying. It's just guaranteed gains. Spend materials, get gains. GG easy, man. Love it. That aspect I really like. Overall, I would give the equipment system a 4 out of 10. And one of the biggest detractors of the equipment system, I would say, is that I would like for there to be strategic choices, but there really aren't any here. You have really just one piece that's meta and known to be meta for each troop type, and that's what you make. And so there isn't really a strategic choice. And I'll say also that legendaries have a 50% cost to dismantle. In other words, this cost me 40 legendary materials to make. I only get 20 back if I decide I want to make something else, and I lose the legendary pattern also. So changing your mind, switching cost is absolutely astronomical, higher than literally any other game I've ever played with regard to an equipment system. It is through the roof. You could do the math, and it's like hundreds or thousands of dollars, depending on the size of the piece you're getting rid of. Plus, if you have a special talent on one of these pieces, which basically costs you can, let me show you this piece, you can refine. Every time you refine, you get a minimum of 25% of the way. In a worst case, you have to do this 4 times, right? So, and it costs you 50% of the materials. So anyways, it can basically be double the cost of crafting.
Listen, all we had to say is you got to spend a shiitake mushroom amount of money to get to where he's at. / to get to where I would imagine you're at a point where you have these maxed. I think this kind of hones in on like the free-to-play friendliness along with what I think is fair criticism based on what Chiz is explaining. I mean, the fact is man, it would be nice if they just, like in CoD, they have Warpets, right? And I'm sure he might get to this in a moment. But it's one of those things where it's like, man, why can't we just have like a standard Pokemon type system where it's like, you go out, you do a mini game or a task to go ahead and get these, and it's just more grind heavy than it is, or at least you have the ability to get, and this is the thing I'm going to bring, and I'll say this maybe at the end, but my view is pretty simple on these types of materials. Every single thing in a game should be attainable by free-to-play. It doesn't mean that you should be able to get it as fast as someone who's spending, but you should be able to get everything in the game, and there's an asterisk here, without having to spend premium currency. That is the most important aspect. And one of the best ways to do this is you just have it time controlled, right? Where you're not removing them from areas that cost premium currency or spending. What you're doing is you're adding them to free areas, right? So in this case, it could be a gold chest. In this case, it could be whatever the chest is, right? That dishes out equipment, if there is any, right? Or armaments in this case, right? Or if not, making one. And then you have opportunities to roll. Because keep in mind, it's still going to take you, once again, a shiitake mushroom, a lengthy amount of time to max out all of these things anyways. And it's all percentage bases on RNG to roll them, and anything that you do, even if they are available to you, is free to play. So that's just my view on it. And so, yeah, let's continue.
In order to actually do a refine and get not 8 things to manage per commander in this game. It's just 1. And the one thing you got to manage here, okay, is your artifact. And the artifact you can power up to get a bunch of stats. You can do that by increasing the star level. You can do that by increasing the level of the artifact. And enemies. This one even clones your damn unit. And the number of times I have tricked people into attacking the clone of my unit is shocking. This one taunts all your enemies to attack you nearby, 5 of them, and makes you really tanky. So TLDR between equipment and artifacts, bro, the artifacts freaking slap. I give these an 8 out of 10. The only detractors I have for artifacts is they're not particularly fun to obtain. Like, it is far more satisfying, strangely enough, to work on equipment over time than it is to work on artifacts. And the event where you get them for the end game best artifacts it's very heavily pay gated. Like, you either pay for the artifacts or you're just not really going to get them. And like, that's fine, but accessibility to all of these really cool artifacts.
Let's be fair. It's fun if you
artifacts is limited, but there are a bunch of artifacts you can get for free over time drawing over here. This is the equivalent of where you can sort of pull gold keys in Rise of Kingdoms. You also have gold keys. I mean, it's an equipment key, what it is from Rise of Kingdoms. So, these are gold chests in Call of Dragons. right? Totally separate idea. Ooh, I actually need that legendary commander, so that was freaking sweet. Right? Like most games have pulls to get commanders, right? This game also has pulls in a meaningful way to get artifacts. You can get a legendary artifact every 90 pulls. There is a pity system in this game built in, whereas there is no pity system in Rise of Kingdoms that I know of for the same way you can do pulls over here in the equipment chests. But good news, the events that you get in the game are actually quite rewarding, I feel. Maybe I should say satisfying as well, for going and getting the materials you need to craft. Now, this brings us to the next way that you...
Yeah, so, I think, once again, as I said, right, in my conclusion there, is that I just think the easiest way to do this is you make events where you can acquire such keys, right, for whether it's equipment, if it's artifacts. You have events where maybe you can win some other types of materials for them that's needed. Obviously, there's some differences between Rock and CoD. But at the end of the day, all of those things should be attainable and should be, like, for example, all of the artifacts in Rock, or excuse me, all the equipment in Rock, you should be able to, over time, let me be clear here, over time, be able to max these things out from the equipment chest. Everything eventually should be added to the equipment chest. Again, if you want to release a new, like, I'll give you an example. Let's say you release 3 new pieces of equipment in the next update. Let's say one of them goes to the equipment chest and the other 2 are paywall gated. Okay, allow those 2 pieces of equipment that are paywall gated to be exclusive for 2 months or 3 months or whatever the duration is, and then once that finishes, they are then added, not removed, added to the equipment chest. This is one of, in my opinion, I think the best ways to do this kind of thing. Even if you made it a month, let the people who are going to spend. They're still going to spend no matter what. And it's not like all of a sudden, because you're able to pool parts of, let me be clear, you're able to pool materials to craft these things, that you're not going to just get all of it in one pool. Like, let's really put things into perspective and at least have some reality here. So it's one of those things where it's like, man, I can't wait for a game to do this, because when they do, people, pending that they are just solid in all of the departments, this will be such a free-to-play catch, and I'm going to tell you, players will gravitate towards this, and it's really not going to be that much of an impact that anyone really thinks. If anything, it'll actually be more of a net positive than it is a net negative.
You power up your commanders in battle in Rise of Kingdoms, and that is the formation system. And I have covered the formation system in depth in a lot of videos, and I think there's a lot of opportunity, and the line between what I would enjoy and not enjoy in this system is pretty fine. But unfortunately,
I just want to say, I like how he was smiling, like he was thinking of something. And I just feel part of me, like in his mind, was him thinking about maybe the true ranged PvP that we have in CoD versus what's in Rock. And it's just like, when that smile kicked in for a moment there before he transitioned on the cut, I was like, man, is that what he's thinking? Or it was probably something else. But that's just what my playful brain was going in that direction.
This is on the end of systems that are really not my favorite in this game. So how does this work? You pick a formation, then you obtain through immense randomness these things called armaments. You need 4 different types of armaments, okay, for each commander. And then you randomly need these stats to be for the actual desired troop type. So this is all infantry. It makes it look easy, but the overwhelming majority of these are random for different things. You can get randomly things you don't want and would never ever want on a commander. The values range. So you could get triple infantry for an infantry commander, which sounds amazing, and then it rolled entirely low stats. So this can be an upwards of 3.5 at the high end or 1.5 at the low end. You can roll triple infantry, which would be God tier, except it's 1.5 for everything. And on top of all that, you have to have inscriptions. Ideally, you'd have 2 of them per, but you can never actually build an armament with 2 legendary or 2 inscriptions. And there are rarities. There's legendary, rare, and common. You can only get these double inscriptions through gambling. So I actually would give this system a 1 out of 10. I won't go any further on it. I'll just say, for me, it's a big 1 out of 10. The difference between this being really amazing and where it is actually not that far off. The only thing you'd need to do to make this system actually awesome is to make it all about the inscriptions. Right now, there's really no strategy whatsoever to it's all randomness for how you decide what you're going to do and what you're going to get. But if you actually had control of putting 2 inscriptions on every single armament, and there was a meaningful variety of strategic choices that were made in the inscriptions, then this system would be fire. You'd actually be making choices to customize the way your commander works, as opposed to a new bar being added to the game that simply elevates the requirements in order to participate against other people who pursue this to its fullest. I think that's how I would describe that. And this, by the way, so I give this a 1 out of 10, but compare this to what's in Call of Dragons.
Okay, first off, absolutely hilarious. Chiz is the champion right now in my eyes. I'm already so confused. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I'm picking up pieces, and I more or less I feel like I semi have this at an entry level because this is my first time actually seeing this. But the level of confusion, and I'm sure when Chiz was saying it, he's like, okay, this is how I'm going to explain this. I'm just saying, for me as a viewer, utterly lost, like just from like a big picture. And then what makes this so much sweeter is the fact that he was just so honest and was like, dude, it's a 1. It's just like, okay, the confusion equals the rating for me. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. But I get at the entry level of it's like, look, I can't really customize. I can't really specialize. I can't really make this into my own. I think that makes sense. And I want to say, I think it's great that he's this open about that stuff, especially for a game he's been playing for a very long time and is still happy to provide that constructive criticism.
And I'm sorry, Rise of Kingdoms players, you're about to be very jealous. In Call of Dragons, you have pets. So instead of having 4 extra things to manage per commander, and by the way, there's like 9 different formations. So you need 4 armaments per formation that you plan to use per commander pairing. Plus you have to have all the inscriptions. In this game, you bring 1 pet per march in the open field, right? Like, I want to bring Lilia. She's got this pet attached to her. All right. Now, the way that pets work is really freaking awesome. You go out and you capture them, and pets have different attributes.
I mean, it's Pokemon.
This pet has really high intelligence and really high spirit. And then you put skills onto your pet. Remember how I was just saying that I really wanted to customize what my commander could do? That's what this is. You enhance what the pet can do or what your commander can do. And each of these different pets has really cool, really different things that they do. So, and they're uniquely good at these different things. And that's because of a skill over here. It's called the talent skill. So you literally train your pet. You pick and choose what skills you want to put onto it. You collect the skills, you deploy them, and it's only 1 thing to manage per hero. Whereas in Rise of Kingdoms, there are many times where I hit the cap of 2,000 armaments, and I have to start going in and shredding them and recycling them. It's just so much minutia and micromanagement. Whereas the pets, pets freaking slap. I would give the pet system a 9 out of 10. It is so fun. It is so rewarding. And they have been making it better. So that 9 out of 10 includes a change that they made that basically makes it so that you can increase the star level of these skills by getting more of the same skill at that same star level. So TLDR, without going too far into it, pets are freaking sweet, man. Very cool system. One of my favorite parts about Call of Dragons, quite frankly, along with the artifacts. And like artifacts and pets compared to equipment and armaments, hey, yo, it is just not the same universe, my friends.
Okay, so commenting on the pets, so Chiz is right in regards to the future of the pets. And let me be very clear here. Pets were not always like this. When they came out, I can't tell you how many people were in an uproar, and how much feedback there was. And let me tell you, it was not all sunshine and rainbows. However, the devs have listened to the community and continue to listen to the community on Warpets. And over time, the Warpets have gotten better. And if this update that's going to drop tomorrow on the 11th, or you could argue today a little after reset, but it will be available tomorrow, is where we're getting a huge Warpet overhaul that on paper, it looks easy breezy, beautiful cover girl. My friends, it really does. Now, obviously, we have to make sure that it plays out that way. But if it does play out the way that it is on paper, it is a big win. And so this is not the first time. They've done, I think, at least about three adjustments to Warpets already that have been really, for the most part, a net positive and a win. So it's been great to see that over a period of time. And I think the biggest difference, if you're really looking at Warpets and artifacts, is that they all kind of have unique roles and unique usages, right? So it could be the fact that you have different CC effects with artifacts, right? Keep in mind, these are timed active skills that you can choose when you want to activate them, and they all have different usages, which means that you are able to have more creative PvP combat out in the field, or even PvE combat. And I think with Warpets, even though Warpets, I think there was a little looseness there with what Chiz was saying as far as, and I say this because Warpets, similarly to equipment, can very much eventually get to a point, if not, it is kind of at somewhat of a point already where it's like, okay, this is the best Warpet for this type of hero, this is the best Warpet for this type of hero, and it's not as though there's 5 different Warpets that could go on a mage, and they can all be used in 5 different unique situations that could all have value out in the open field, right? Now, maybe it gets to that point, but it's not there yet. And so I just wanted to give that disclaimer just so it's fair kind of on both sides of that. But I do overall agree with what he rated based on what I saw from Rock and what he explained, along with what he said for CoD.
Which brings us to collection. How well do these games value your collection over time? And when we get it back into Rise of Kingdoms here, I would rate Rise of Kingdoms in terms of valuing your collection over time at a 5. I would say that there are times where you get really rewarded for having collected, and there are also times where you get really racked. For example, I have this leadership talented equipment, but they later added an actual leadership set into the game. I'm just racked. This is like $10,000 worth of equipment, and I have no way to change it over to like the leadership equipment. I lose the overwhelming majority of my materials, as I described earlier. Like this aspect of Rise of Kingdoms, unfortunately, is like really not valuing my investment into the game. Contrast that, however, to the Legendary Commander system. And Rise of Kingdoms did something very, very brilliant here. Universal Legendary Commander sculptures are available very regularly. And I mean, I have a lot of them right now because I'm hoarding, and I won't get into it, but like I have 2,295 of those. I could max probably the next 4 commanders that show up. And you can do that the literal day the commander comes into the game. I cannot overstate how fun that is for players. I will emphasize, it is extremely fun for players to be able to have the new hotness on day one. You can do it if you're free to play. You can do it if you're pay to win. The only difference is how frequently you can do it, and that is a freaking elegant system. Very, 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 very cool.
The new hotness.
Outstanding. If we get a look at Call of Dragons, I actually also would give it a 5. So I'm going to give them both a 5, but for different reasons. And although Rise of Kingdoms is a very generous Legendary Commander sculpture system, Call of Dragons has a generational hero system that makes it so that your universal hero tokens in this game lose value potentially over time. So here you can see I have Generation 2 hero tokens, and I have universal legendary hero tokens, which are extremely rare in this game. I can only use G2 hero tokens on a Generation 2 hero or a Generation 1 hero. When Generation 3 comes out, I cannot use them on them. So the weirdness here is that you can't like jump into a new meta and max the new hero the moment that they show up. Now, with that said, the price of a legendary hero token is literally half what it is for a legendary commander sculpture. And you can get a bundle if you really wanted to in this game and get many, 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 many more hero tokens than you could in the equivalent bundle in Rise of Kingdoms for legendary commander sculptures, the Heroes of Tomorrow's bundle. So there's really like pros and cons to both systems here. I like them both for different reasons, but I would rate them both at a 5. Now,
okay, so the one thing Chiz does not mention here, and I just want to point out because to me, this, I don't want to say it was a missed opportunity, but I do think it's a very big thing, and I hope everyone really understands this, is that he's talking about the collection aspect. That is one of two parts. The first part is how do you gather and how do you acquire these heroes and commanders. Remember, collection is the second part. That's what you get after you gather. right? And so it goes back to what we were saying and talking about before, is it would have been nice if he showed off, hey, here's how many legendary heroes, commanders you can get for free without spending anything, without spending money, without using premium currency, and then how many can you get in CoD, right? So what's the difference? And then how many events are there where as a free-to-play you can get heroes that maybe may not be in gold chests in either game for free without using premium currency or spending out of the total amount of heroes that are there. So I think like that would have been a nice thing to go into for the first part, and then the second part talking about the collection aspect, which again, I actually agree there. I see where he's coming from on that. I think the only other thing I would add in, and I said this earlier, is my view is that every hero should have a purpose. And you should be able to use heroes out in the field, and they should be aiming to fine-tune heroes in a similar way they do in something like League of Legends, where they're hopefully always trying to look at how can we get low usage rate heroes to become higher usage rate heroes, right? And sometimes it's not really even about making major or drastic changes. It could be just doing some percentage changes, some damage output changes, some reductions, stat changes here and there that could be smaller in size, like we have seen them do for CoD already a little bit over some updates, right? So that's the only thing I wanted to mention.
Now we can talk about, I think, graphics. Let's switch gears and talk about graphics, baby. I would say that if we compare, right, like the commander graphics in here to the hero graphics in Call of Dragons, I mean, it's a little more 3D, but I would not say that like I find the Call of Dragons 10. Call of Dragons.
Okay, I'm just going to say this. I know Rock is also going to be coming out with some like HD update that I ended up hearing about. When I first started playing Rise of Kingdoms, I thought Rise of Kingdoms had great graphics. I still consider them to have good graphics. Again, if I'm comparing that with CoD, CoD is newer. My belief is it just should have, right? Better graphics. That doesn't mean that it has a better theme per se, right? Or anything else. It's just like, okay, does the graphics look cleaner? Are they more high definition? Can I identify more? Can I see more on the character? Right? Is shadowing, is shading, is textualization, is that there? These are things that really come into like, okay, well, are these... It's like the difference between watching Pong on your Atari being played versus your PS5 or your Xbox One, whatever it may be, right? It's just like you would hope and assume that graphics will be better. But I don't think that the graphics for Rock are bad by any means. Right, I could show you some Kingdom Builders that I just think have poor graphics. But yeah, I don't think that this is like that big. I don't think to me this is like that drastic, right? Like if Rock had some changes in its gameplay and some other areas, I would still be playing Rock without a doubt, right? It's not like I'm playing CoD just solely because I think the graphics are a little bit better compared to where Rock is currently.
Dragons graphics slap. And from here, we can talk about the actual map design.
Also, is it just me, or does Chiz just like slapping? Little slappy? Make daddy happy? No, I understand what he means when he says slaps. It was just funny.
Now, although the graphics are not as good, the actual map design in Rise of Kingdoms has been refined over a really long time, and I think is very good. The progression of the zones generally makes sense. The flow of where you go generally makes sense. There are not very many strategic choices to be made with your territory. Like, hey, sometimes there's a mountain, sometimes there's a river, but like those are not really focal points of the battle. They shape where you go, but you generally can just go right over them. And so I would give Rise of Kingdoms for its maps a 6 out of 10. Good diversity, good experience, very much refined over time, and very favorable in that way. I would give Call of Dragons, however, and their map design an 8 out of 10. And there's a couple things that make me really value.
Okay, so I think that's a little generous on the Rock side. However, I understand where he's coming from. I mean, let's just be fair. Rock maps are symmetrical, CoD maps are asymmetrical, and Rock maps are pretty straightforward where the majority of the terrain is just open field. There's not an abundance of natural choke points like you have in CoD. Those are basically, probably you could summarize and say those are the biggest differences all in all. So it's just like, I mean, that's just what it is. But I agree that when you talk about the map that's been refined over time because of how long the game's been out, along with the map adjustments that they have made to the game since the beginning, right? I don't think a 6 is like, I think it just depends on what you're really stacking it up against, right? And understanding that symmetrical maps are what they are, asymmetrical maps are what they are, and then, you know, I think when it comes to like map, and he's going to talk about some of these things in a moment, it's just, yeah, would I rate the map design better for COD? I would, and that's just because there's more things you can do, right? And it expands the strategy and the tactical options for you because of how the map design is. I mean, yeah. So, I mean, I think an 8 actually is fair when it comes to, depending on what he talks about here.
What is happening here in Call of Dragons? The first is these are meaningful, strategic map choices being made. So the game forces you to move along a certain path and make very meaningful strategic choices as you go along that route. And there are a bunch of things that sort of make you do that. And I won't get into all of them, but one of them is that like these choke points are insane. They're powerful to defend, and very, very meaningful strategic choices can be made. And it takes real teamwork to push a bridge. Like you actually have to do far beyond anything Rise of Kingdoms ever will have strategy in order to play. Same is true of elevation. Rise of Kingdoms has no elevation. Here you have elevation and you have range combat, which we'll talk about units a little bit later on. But the
only thing I'm going to say here, and I don't know if he's going to mention this, is that I just wish that if you had ranged units on the second level or the third level or on a cliff or a ledge like this where it's elevated, that they would have increased range. And I'm not saying it's got to be game breaking, right? It can be like 1 to 2 or 3 legion lengths of range that's increased, right? And you can always make adjustments, but it would just be nice if you are on a ledge or on a second level or any elevated level compared to where your enemies are, and you have 2 units, one that's on the lower elevation and the higher elevation, they're the same unit type, and the one that's on the higher elevation is able to connect first before their enemy comes into range. Like, that's as simple as it is, right? Like, that would be dope. And I think that's something that would absolutely be such a positive W, because now we're getting into like real, right? It's almost like simulating more real life environment to an extent. And so I just think it would be such a W. Okay.
Elevation in this map also very meaningfully changes the way that the game is played. And if I just show you like a choke point over here that's really well defended, like this is a bridge. Bridges are hard to push. They have keeps, which they can reinforce with troops, and they have towers that are going to shoot at us. Like, we probably cannot take this bridge. We just can't. And I think it is very cool that a well-designed small number of online players can defend against a larger group if you've set up a proper defense. It is very cool. You make far more strategic choices on these maps than I have ever made. Like, one map in Call of Dragons in one season has more strategic choices than the entirety of the time that I've been playing Rise of Kingdoms. And I mean that in a loving way, because I genuinely love both games, but I would give this an 8 out of 10. The only thing I would really kind of hold against the map design in Call of Dragons is that they haven't yet had the refinement that Rise of Kingdoms has. Let's go and talk about KVKs versus seasons. I mean, this seems like a good time. The way that KVKs work in Rise of Kingdoms is that your kingdom in the end game will register for KVK. You will then get matched, hopefully, or you might get not matched. But if you get matched, you then step into a season. You can go and teleport into a special map, but you still have your home kingdom. And for like 50 or so days, you're going to battle in that map. KVKs are freaking sweet. I would give it a 6 out of 10. There's a little bit of weirdness, however, with your ability to dodge kingdoms that you don't want to fight. It is actually impossible to make the best possible KVKs in this game unless the players agree to go and make them. Which, like, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's good that players have the control, but it's also kind of a bummer because often the biggest kingdoms all just avoid each other. Like, there's 1 or 2 kingdoms that nobody wants to fight and they just try to dodge them. And there's a bunch of ways that goes on. But KVKs are a cool mechanic. I would give them a solid 6 out of 10. And you get half your troops back when they die, which is pretty sweet. We'll talk about that more later. The seasons in Call of Dragons, I think, are interesting, but is really unpopular. So seasons in Call of Dragons have a reset. They last also much longer. So a season is like 70 to 90 days that you're going to be on this map, as opposed to the 50 days in Rise of Kingdoms. And like, by the way, it's already been almost like, I don't know, I want to say like 20 days since we took the dragon. In both Rise of Kingdoms and Call of Dragons, I really feel like the seasons and the KVKs should end way sooner than they do. Because once the dragon is taken, it's over. It's over. Like, the team that lost doesn't want to be here. The team that won is kind of ready to move on and is bored. Like, I would end seasons a lot faster. But the other thing that I think is more triggering for a lot of people, and I've gotten so many comments where they're like, I don't play because, it is because every season your hero levels are reset back down to 30. So you have to re-level up.
So I just want to comment on the KVK portion real quick before at least the first half. So overall, I actually agree here with this. I think in Rock, it is interesting. I think the idea at face value of being able to choose which KVK or what type of KVK that you go into and you can register for it. Similarly in Rock, how you're able to register for in CoD, how you're able to register for your Roots of War, right, which is basically like your Ark of Osiris in Rock. And you can register the day and time. And maybe they have that in Rock in CoD 2 as well. I'm not 100% sure. But I think it's an interesting concept. But I think Chiz also brings up a lot of valid points there, which is like, I mean, if you're just going to get dodged by top kingdoms and you're never going to see like some of the epic matchups that you want, I mean, that would be like saying, you know, we weren't going to be able to watch like Floyd Mayweather versus Pacquiao, Manny Pacquiao. You know what I mean? Like those types of just epic matchups that you want to see, right? And even if you don't get them all the time, it'd be still nice to get them some of the time. And so I think if COD decides to not do something like that, and it's more of like, hey, everyone's going to play the same KVKs out per season, we're not going to give you the choice, but we'll just expand the pool so you also have opportunities to get diverse matchups or other matchups, and then every so often maybe we'll match up the best of the best, right? Then that'd be dope. And I think the path that they're on right now with the actual system for how it's going, and bear in mind it's still early, I think that if they opt to not have registered KVKs, I actually would be in favor of that just to see how it plays out. Mainly because it doesn't allow for you to dodge, right? At least in the way that he was explaining in compared to Rock.
Up every season, which rewards activity, but like over time has gotten kind of old. Like the first time I did it, I was like, okay. The second time I was like, sure. The third and fourth is like, yeah, this again. And I feel like that's just only going to get worse. So my hope is that they remove the need to level everything up. In new seasons, by the way,
so on this idea of that, you have to now bear in mind, you used to have to level your hero up all the way from 1. In one of the recent updates, I think 2 or 3 updates ago, they changed this to where now your heroes, if you level them up to 30 and beyond, they will fall back down to 30, right? So you don't have to level them up as much. However, I do somewhat tend to agree with Chiz on this one. I do lean a little bit more in favor of not having to reset your heroes, mainly just because there's so many heroes that you already have to level up, especially when you think about the fact that COD does not have as many heroes as Rock does. Imagine if you had 2 to 3 times the amount of heroes that these games do. And the fact is that the more heroes that you have at 60 also means the longer lasting PvP and fights that you can have as well. Because you'll see more heroes out in the field based on the stamina system that COD has. So to me, there's actually more of an inherent W that can come out of this if they were to test out removing the EXP leveling system for heroes and artifacts, right, in those regards. And again, right, if they want to change it back, the main thing is you just have to be upfront with your community. You just have to say, look, we want to test this out for a season, and we want to see how it works, and then we're going to collect feedback and make a decision. Or we'll test this out for 2 seasons. Like, this is not a difficult or challenging thing to do. Right now, yeah, is there an argument to say that probably a good amount of people would be in favor of removing resets on heroes and artifacts in Call of Dragons, where you can just max all of them at 60? Yeah. At the same time, is it something that can cause players to spend on the game because they want to get more heroes up to max level? Yes. I think that is pretty understood from anyone that's been playing Kingdom Builders for a while, and or if you've been playing CoD for a little bit as well.
There is not really balance to the maps. In other words, a whole bunch of kingdoms are told, hey, here's a map. You all figure out what you want to do. And you can join, I think at the time of this recording anyways, you can join any zone you want. Now, they're going to change that so that I don't think you can do that anymore, which is going to be huge. But like, the seasons right now are not balanced. It's totally up to the players to make a good experience in the season. You can definitely make an imbalanced season in your favor. And because of what I talked about earlier with migration, like, you should make season.
So I just want to be clear here. What he's I just hope no one takes this as like him saying that this is COD specific, because you can register for KVKs and still make unbalanced KVKs just depending on who you ally with, right? So it very much is in control and is up to the players, and more particularly the leadership of those kingdoms, to ensure that there's going to be that. And Chiz actually talked about this when I don't know if we reacted to like the drama video that he did with 1960 and a few others, but I remember watching one of his videos, and he specifically said this, that it's like they all get into a group, they want to try and make it as fair as possible, but it was just hard to kind of come to agreements. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Seasons in your favor if you want your group to continue to exist. So like, I would give seasons right now a 1. I think there's a lot of potential. I would love to see them change, but like, there's even ways that you can nefariously invade another group's starting zone. Like, in one of our seasons, a group that we let be in our starting zone to have like a farm and growth alliance was getting bribed by the winning alliance that had betrayed us. And they wanted to have like join the alliance so that they could get into our starting zone and invade us and give us literally nowhere to live. Like, bruh, seasons in this game, I think they're being improved dramatically. And I am looking forward to that progression. Now, this brings us.
So what he's mainly talking about there is that home kingdoms are eventually going to be coming. They're going to be coming in the next update for Call of Dragons, and which is, I think, projected for May. So it's going to be next month sometime, probably a month and a half away at this time. And most likely, if that happens, there could very much be home kingdom starting zones that end up appearing, which you very much have in Rock, and you don't really have that in COD, because any alliance and any players can choose whichever zone 1 they want to start in. So you can very much have Zone 1 Wars. You don't typically have that happening for obvious reasons, but you can, and they have happened before. And so, and you could argue still happening, here and there. But just to give that clarity, I think the 1 rating on the way that the KV, because remember, this is like a KVK versus seasons part, but keep in mind, these are KVKs, right? And so I think not everything he touched on that has to do with the KVK, which is the season reset, the map design, the way that heroes and artifacts reset in KVKs in KVK seasons here in COD. I don't think everything is bad by any means. Like, again, I think the fact that he gave the map a little bit more of a higher score, I just don't think a 1 is what I would rate this. I would probably rate the actual KVK season in its entirety probably like a 3, right? And I would probably give the Rock KVKs, I don't know if he said a 6 or 7, right? And again, I'm just going off of when I played. I would say the Rock KVKs were probably more like around a 6 or 7, but I would probably give the COD ones like a solid 3 based on how they are now. Just because, and I'm not saying that they're bad by any means, but I do think there's a healthy amount of opportunity to grow.
This is to the combat. And in both games, you've got full open field movement. You select what combinations you want to bring into the open field, and you target the thing you want to hit. So combat is similar in both games, but I would say for these small skirmishes, Rise of Kingdoms, I would give a 7 out of 10. The combat is very simplistic, like target thing, fight thing, target next thing, fight thing. There's really like unlike in Call of Dragons, where you have things to activate and strategic choices to make, yeah, you move around and you control your position, but your marches do what they do and they fight the way they fight. And you also need to use tokens in order to fight properly. So in this game, anytime you want to actually fight, you'd better pop a 50% expansion because you're going to lose to someone who has a 50% expansion if you don't. You probably want to pop a 10% buff, also costs you gems. So there's a bunch of things that you need to use and spend gems in order to actually properly fight in this game on a whim. Contrast that to Call of Dragons, and I would give Call of Dragons fighting a 10 out of 10. Small ball fighting, small group fighting, 10 out of 10. Super strategic, units operate differently. You have artifacts that I've showed you that like have abilities that activate in extremely meaningful ways in combat. Small skirmish fighting is freaking sweet, and there are real consequences. So in this game, you have what's called a stamina limit. Stamina basically controls how often you can fight other players. You generate 12 stamina per hour. You have 150 total to work with in the latest seasons. There was less in the earlier seasons, but
yeah, so stamina, I believe, used to be at 100, and I think they increased it to 150. Someone can correct me on those numbers if we're wrong. But essentially, the reason they increased stamina is because, and you can argue this however you want. You could say on one side of it, it's because the people that were spending wanted to be able to use the best heroes and keep them out longer because you were basically depleting stamina before you depleted troops. And so, right, and then the other side of it is, okay, well, now everyone gets an opportunity to use heroes a little bit longer out in fights where they don't get drained as much. And it's not as though we have 100 different heroes, right? And you multiply that 150 by 100, and then you have a lot more stamina to use, and you're able to use other heroes too as well, right? For some players who probably burnt through all their stamina, and we're talking like the mid-high spenders, right, who are probably burning through stamina on all their main hero marches, and then they're going to their secondary heroes that are in marches, right, who may not be getting as favorable trades, right? Like, it's just, I'm sure you could see where that's going.
But anyways, combat is meaningful. Combat is strategic. Elevations make combat really interesting. There's flying units, which makes combat really interesting. 10 out of 10. Now, when we talk about big fights, big fights. And
I just want to say, I think, we'll see what he says here. I personally think that all PvP, doesn't matter to me if it's small or large scale, I think all PvP in COD is a cut above every other kingdom builder. Not just because of the unique mechanics that they have, but also because of the quality and the standard that it can be done at. And so I'll be interested to see if he like rates Rock higher than COD here in large scale fight, just because I would argue against that.
And Rise of Kingdoms. I would give large scale fights in Rock probably a 3 out of 10. And I might be able to like find one to show you. But the weirdness of big fights in Rise of Kingdoms is that they're just really, really cluttered. And it's so cluttered you have to zoom out to what's called dot mode in order to operate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they're mosh pits.
Often the dots are like laggy or not where they're represented, I find. I don't know, maybe I just have a skill issue. But like, anyways, it's hard to tell what you're targeting.
I mean, just look at that. It's a mosh pit, right? It is a horde of human beings in a small condensed area. Call it what you will, that's just not fun, right? Like, you want to be able to see the units clearly, micro clearly, have control, see the animations and the attacks. Like, everything should be fluid in that sense. And again, that might tickle some people's pickles, but not this guy.
You just sort of hope for the best and hope you don't lag out and hope your hospital doesn't overflow, which we'll talk about later. Contrast that to Call of Dragons. I would give Call of Dragons an 8 out of 10. In a large-scale fight in Call of Dragons, you are fighting in a way that you've got some pretty good control. Dot mode has some of the same problems as Rise of Kingdoms, but the amount of strategy it takes, given that like infantry operate like infantry and block the enemy's physical position, and mages can attack from a very long distance, and marksmen can attack from mid-range, and cavalry move really fast and can charge and really wreck ranged units that are caught off guard. All of these things make the combat just unfathomably more dynamic and, in my opinion, rewarding. In Rise of Kingdoms, you'll say, hey, move the ball over here, move the ball over there. And like, that should tell you everything you need to know. Like, everybody just stand here and go to this position is the level of depth of the strategy. Whereas you can do flanking maneuvers, you can do teleportation maneuvers using artifacts, jumping over water. You can use flying units. You can do 100 things that are so cool in this game. The big fights are so much more rewarding, I find. And not to mention, I'm not done. Not to mention that you can use something called a behemoth. So in Rise of Kingdoms, you capture holy sites, and they are what they are. They give you buffs. Here, you have to battle these behemoths, which is really fun PvE content. But then those behemoths will come and fight on your behalf. So you can literally, like in a big fight here, it's like the infantry go forward and the ranged are following. And then, the enemy summons a giant in the middle of all your units. And then a Hydra gets spawned in and it's poisoning everything. And then a dragon gets spawned in and it's breathing fire. Like, it's freaking hectic. And sometimes it is a little too chaotic, but it's freaking sweet. All right. 8 out of 10 is what I give that. Let's talk about unit diversity.
Yeah, so I think for the most part, probably an 8, maybe 7, 8 out of 10 would be accurate. I think like anything, when you have large-scale fights, probably the most detracting thing, or probably just the most hard pill to swallow, is the amount of lag. And I think that's something that plagues any kingdom builder in large-scale fights. I mean, unless there's a kingdom builder out there that can have 1,000-player fights, 500 on one side, 500 on another side that show up, and it's just smooth, like I'm talking baby oil smooth, then that's dope. I'd love to hear about it. But I think for me, and I'm sure others would agree, like that is the number one plaguing factor for large-scale fights. But outside of that, I do tend to agree here with what Chiz mentions.
In Rise of Kingdoms, you have several core units. The core units that you have in Rise of Kingdoms are infantry, cavalry, archers, and siege units. These units basically all operate the same way with minimal differences between them. Cavalry move faster, infantry move slower. There's no range combat. It's just 3 different types of units to collect and to name as different units. The siege units, most kingdoms will make you delete in order to be meta, but there is now the ability to do range combat and range commanders. It takes 8 seconds to set up to do that and 8 seconds to break down if you want to run away, whereas in Call of Dragons, it's instant. I would give the unit diversity in Rise of Kingdoms probably a 3. There's not really much diversity between the units. People say they like archers, they like infantry, they like cavalry, but like really what they're saying is they like the commanders associated with those things. Whereas in Call of Dragons, I would say that the unit diversity is really fantastic. I think the score I would give this is going to be an 8 out of 10, really high. I already talked a little bit earlier, I got ahead of myself, on the way that these different units work, but like infantry are super tanky and they get more tanky as they take damage. They operate like freaking infantry. Each of these units is so gosh blessed cool. And the flying units freaking fly over the terrain, man. So yeah, 8 out of 10, extremely sweet. Now at this point you might be
Yeah, I mean, nothing to add there. However, I just learned something. I didn't realize that Rock finally had something which is like true ranged PvP. But the fact that he just said it takes 8 seconds to set up and 8 seconds to break down, like what? That doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you not make it instant? I'm just curious. Like, do other people feel that way, or is everyone like, oh my god, finally we have ranged PvP, but it just takes an unnecessary amount of time to set up and break down?
Thinking, man, Chisgule's really been railing Rise of Kingdoms. Well, here's a dimension where Rise of Kingdoms scores the highest, and I've for a long time said the core mechanics of Rise of Kingdoms carry the game, and it is true. And the rally and garrison mechanic in Rise of Kingdoms is a 10 out of 10. It is the best in any game I have seen in this genre. Basically, the way that works is in order to take a structure, you have to make it burn. And if you make it burn, it will lose durability. You make it burn by attacking it, but you can only make it burn if there's nobody left inside. So you got to kill all the troops inside. Well, how do you do that? You got to have a garrison captain. Okay? And the garrison captain elevates the strength of everyone to the captain's strength, which is pretty cool. So you need people to reinforce with their troops and they get elevated to the captain's strength. Well, in order to handle such a high amount of troops, you have to rally. And rallies, all the members joining the rally get elevated to the strength of the rally leader. It is an extremely good mechanic. Even when you're losing, you can still garrison. Very, very, very poggers. I mean, it is what makes this game tick. The rally garrison meta, 10 out of 10. I've not seen it done better anywhere, and I actually don't know how you make it better than what's done here. Now, in Call of Dragons, you do have some of these things. There are passes, but it's not a core part of the game. To take a flag, you burn the flag. Your unit literally stands around the tower and burns it. And it takes like an hour. It is like watching grass grow. Yeah, I would say there's not many occasions to rally or garrison in this game. And that's not a bad thing. Like, it's about the field and strategically moving your troops in the field. And I look at this because, like, I'm in here, I'm garrisoning this right now. The rally garrison meta in this game is not as diverse because there aren't as many heroes. And it's not as prevalent. Overall, I would give this game a 5 for rally and garrison. It's here. When you do it, it is fun. It's not an important part of the game. You know, I look forward to that meta evolving, and we'll see how it evolves. With the different troop types, it could get pretty cool. But Rise of Kingdoms, 10 out of 10. When you rally and garrison, there is troop loss.
So I think really what he's talking about here is not really the quality of the rally and garrison, but the focus or the emphasis that it has on each game. And the fact is that it's a lot more prevalent in Rock than it is in CoD. But it would have been nice if he showed off, like, hey, this is how you do a rally, this is how you garrison, and then did that for both games, just to, like, show that, at least from my understanding, I think they are somewhat similar in that. But I think the focus more here is on how much of a focus is on rally and garrisoning in each game, right, based on the rating. And to be fair, I don't really even know if you even have to do a rating for this, because one game just does it more and one game does it less. I think it's pretty simple.
So depending on, like, what you're defending or attacking, the amount of troops you lose will change. This is actually viewable from your hospital, which is kind of cool. In addition, your hospital is core to this game, but you use tons of resources and speed ups to keep your hospital clear. In Call of Dragons, you're actually limited to the amount of healing you can do in a day. In this game, nah, bro. You can spend as many speed ups and resources as you have. You can just run it down as much as you want. Now, that said, you can even get helped when you smash heal to reduce the amount of healing time. But, like, even that has a limit to the number of times you can do that per day, and people often run out of helps, which is kind of crazy. So I would give troop loss and healing in this game probably a 5 out of 10. Troop loss is core to Rise of Kingdoms. I think it's shocking how accustomed to loss people are here. You lose half your troops. You used to lose 100% of troops, by the way. So, like, let me explain that. In KVK, at the end of the season, you get half your troops back. But it used to be that any troop that died is gone forever. Oh, man, what a world we lived in. So all that to say, troop loss is very core to this game. Call of Dragons, on the other hand, very poggers, man.
So let me explain this, right, in layman's terms for all my simps out there. And by simps, I mean simplistic individuals. And this is to say, like, I'm going to hit you with something that, and I don't think Chiz didn't explain it this way, but I'm going to explain it in this way to you, is that most likely the reason why they did that is simply because of this. The more troops you have available per each kingdom and each fighting player and fighting alliance, the longer lasting the fights will extend to. And they'll be more sustainable. Why? Because you have more troops to throw out there in the field and more troops to lose. So that is it. Like, that's really as simple as it gets. And when you talk about CoD, that's one of the biggest challenges right now, is that there's not enough troops trained in each alliance and in each kingdom to where you're seeing fights that are lasting more than a couple days on average for KVKs. And in fewer than that, in less than that, a handful, you'll see KVKs that can last a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we're talking once you get to the final zone, right? But it's not a norm yet, and part of that's because of how young the game is currently. Part of that is because of the troop training rates that are available and how fast you can train troops and how many troops you can train overall compared to how many people are spending money on troops versus those that are free to play. There are a number of factors that go into this. But really, when you think about it, do I think it's a great change that they did that for Rock? Yeah, I do. And based on Chiz's expression, I'm sure he does as well. And I just think CoD does it good. Like, you don't lose any troops in the open field. at all whatsoever, and you just allow your hospital to fill up as much as you want. Even though there are soft and hard caps on how much healing you can do on each side, along with how long you can fight for. I actually think the system is very well done when you think about it. Sure, can there be some tuning here and there? Of course. But I think out the gate, at a baseline level, it is good.
Look, what is there to say? The healing you can do for free, and the resource healing is limited per day. Now, why am I excited about limited resource healing per day? Because you cannot just be a monkey and run it down and slam that credit card and get wins. You can't. You can't. You run out of troops. You're out. You're tapped. You're done. You're cooked. That's it. You run out of stamina. You run out of troops. GG, son. You have to be skillful. This game requires skill. I think that's freaking sweet. And did I mention that there's free healing? Did I mention? I think you can get an upwards of 2 million free heals per day.
Sorry, just a few more times.
I think that's the maximum. Yeah, there it is. 2 mil free heals per day. And the max resource healing you can do is 3 mil heals per day. So like really, really sweet. Very cool system overall. You generally don't have troop loss in this game. And when you do, it actually favors your city in a way that is extremely favorable to Rise of Kingdoms. In Rise of Kingdoms, if your city gets attacked, your hospital will fill up and then all your other troops die. In this game, 10% of your troops die and 90% hit the hospital. Now, you're guaranteed to have troops die in this game if your city is hit, which is also a good thing. You can't like bait a rally without consequences in this game. Yeah, no, I think troop loss and healing in this game is stellar. You do not get any troops back at the end of the season, however, so what's dead is dead. It's gone and it's gone, man. But I'd give it a 9 out of 10. The systems in this game slap, hands down. And this brings us to the final category, folks. I know this is a long one. There's a lot of stuff. The events. The events in this game, and we'll start with Rise of Kingdoms, are somewhat repetitive. They also can be very rewarding. So the Mightiest Governor is actually very, very cool, very poggers. You get a ton of sculptures to your kingdom every 2 weeks. And you can arrange Mightiest Governor, which is really cool, to reward whoever you want once you get to the end game. Like you can get to a place where there aren't that many rogues in your kingdom, and you can kind of control where those go. Very, very, very.
And just to be clear, he's talking about running like fixed MGEs, where basically you let everyone in the kingdom know via kingdom mail, I would imagine via Discord announcement, and you would say something like, okay, whoever places the highest in the first 4 events up until KE, which is the kill event, typically the last stage of these types of events, then you'll say whoever places right in the top 20 or top positions to get the minimum amount of sculptures or universals that you would need, legendaries, or in this case, right, per that commander, I should specifically say, based on what that MGE is, right, then you're just going to say, okay, these are going to be the top 20 in this example of the players that we want to place in the top overall 20 positions, so nobody should push beyond number 20, right? And what he means by the rogues is that once you eliminate the rogues, it's an easier time to run fixed MGEs where you can decide on who's going to win what placings. And the reason why you end up having kingdoms that do this, like, let's be very clear, this is a spender event. This is a high spender event. You could argue maybe including some mid spenders in there as well, but it really is a high spending event. And the reason why they fix this is because they don't want people to spend unnecessarily, right? And the fact is it's smart, right? You are in control of the system. Don't let the system control you. If you literally could have the top 20 people spend the least amount of money, like let's say all they had to do was spend like $100 each, right? And it's like the number 20 guy spent 100, the number 19 guy spent 101, the number 18 102, the number 17 103. Like, you get where I'm going with this, right? And that's all they had to do. Dear Lord, they would do it. Because why? It makes sense. Otherwise, you have some people, and I'm sure for however many number of kingdoms, that will just run rampant and spend whatever they want, right, to win these or to place in whatever top position they want to. So I just want to give some clarity there.
Very cool system, actually. But other events that are on kind of an ongoing basis can be very rewarding, like Alliance Mobilization. It's kind of like a mini Mightiest Governor, but everybody in your alliance wins. Ark of Osiris, really cool Alliance versus Alliance stuff. Like Rise of Kingdoms has had a lot of time to make really cool events, and there are some very rewarding, very cool events. Some of them, however, are super repetitive. And the weirdness here is that, like, unlike in a typical MMO where you raid a dungeon until you don't need the loot anymore and then you can stop raiding it, you will pretty much always need the things that the game is giving you here. You will always need more materials. You will always need more blueprints. So, like, you have to keep doing these if you want to keep getting the rewards. And it's basically the same sort of thing every time. I don't mind it. Some people really do. But overall, pretty solid. I would give Rise of Kingdoms events a 7 out of 10. Oh, and I should mention the Osiris League. I mentioned Ark of Osiris, right? The Alliance versus Alliance stuff. But technically it's 30 versus 30. But, like, there's a whole league with, like, prizes. And it's very well done. Casting, I mean, to pat myself on the back, I cast this event, so I'm biased. 7 out of 10 here. I would give Call of Dragons a 4 out of 10. Okay? Call of Dragons events have not yet been built out. They have the equivalent of, Ark of Osiris. They have what's called Roots of War. I think Roots of War is very cool, very dynamic. You summon behemoths, which Rise of Kingdoms doesn't have a similar sort of design of map, but there's not yet a tournament that is the equivalent of what you have for Ark of Osiris. It is what it is. I think this game will have cool events eventually. I'll give it a 4 out of 10.
Okay, so I just want to point something out here, right? and this is just respectfully. If you're going to compare events, list out all the events. Like, this is not a difficult thing to do, right? There's sites that have all of the events listed. I know for Rock for certain. And then for COD, possibly. Like, I have a COD everything spreadsheet that has a number of events on it, but I don't think I've included some of the more recent ones. But if I was going to do this one and I was going to rate them, I would say, here's a list of all the events, and then you categorize the events into different categories, to say less. And then you compare those events based on how many categories they fall into, and you compare them against each other. And then you could say, okay, like, here's some rewards that may be similar or not. But I just think that would have been a little visually, right, a little better of a way to kind of compare the events compared to him talking about a couple events in Rock and then mostly one event in COD. Okay, let's go.
There's a lot of people who feel toward your stuff kind of works, and toward your stuff gets a grand total of 104. And if you made it this far in the video, gosh bless, I appreciate it. Toward your stuff kind of works. You'll be doing them for a while. All right. So overall, when we look at the ratings of these games, I would give Rise of Kingdoms, we sum all that up, a grand total of 87.
Okay.
And Call of Dragons gets a grand total of 104.
Oh.
And if you made it this far in the video, gosh bless, I appreciate you. Throw a like on here. Consider subscribing. This video is so long, I don't even know if anyone's going to watch it. Maybe it's just too long. But
no, what's too long is this reaction
overall,
video.
Each game has its virtues.
And if you've made it this far to hear that,
Rise of Kingdoms
let me know in the comments.
By far the better mechanisms for building community and the cool.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it. Again, I'm already at basically an hour and a half in this. And if anyone makes it to the end, I want you to. I would love for you to leave a comment. Let me know what you. Let me know what you think about my take, about my thoughts on the reaction. And also, when you do that, I want you to put the number that I'm holding with my hands in there, because you are the real OGs. What number is this? Who knows? It could be. Okay, that's gonna do it for me. I hope you all enjoyed this one. As always, until next time, I will catch y'all later.